Okay, so this slide here now shows us summation. So what is summation? So summation is when when the muscle contraction is actually increased. So what do we mean by that? So summation here can occur until maximal sustained contraction, known as tetanus, is actually achieved. So looking at this figure here, for example, right? So we could see here as a stimuli, right? So this is a stimuli, and then the force of the muscle is going to respond to it. And of course, just like with everything else, once it reaches the peak, it's going to relax down this one over here. But before it completely relaxes to this point, for example, over here, another stimulus is applied. So now we could see this a higher force being generated, and then again, stimulus applied again, and then another stronger force is being generated by this third stimuli right over here. And now you could see that these stimulus are like one right next to each other, and now you could see it up here still generating a greater force until it reaches the peak, and then it plateaus. So this plateau over here, where you could see all these stimulus right next to each other, this is known as tetanus. So tetanus right here will continue, right? So will continue. You still have the stimulus right over here. So tetanus continues. So this flat line over here still continues until the muscle finally fatigues. So what do you mean by fatigue? So the muscle gets so tired that basically, even though you're still stimulating that muscle, the force is no longer being generated, but rather now the force is decreasing. So tetanus right here continues until the muscle fatigues due to depletion of energy reserve. So take note, in order for muscle to contract, you need ATP. In order for you to generate ATP, you need glucose, and so on and so forth. So once those are all depleted, and now the muscle fatigues, and then it's now going to go back to its normal resting state. So fatigue, this is when muscle relaxes even though stimulation continues. So stimulation continues right over here, but the muscle is still going to relax. Okay, this is not the same as infection called tetanus. So take note, when you talk about the infection called tetanus, this is due to a bacteria. Tetanus in the muscle over here, that's different. Right over here, tetanus over here, it just means that the muscles being stimulated one right after each other, and then leading to this plateau right over here. So you have the three phases, as we mentioned before, of the single muscle twitch, and how summation and tetanus increases the force of contraction. So this is how summation increases the force of muscle contraction. Next slide here is called recruitment. So what is recruitment? So I'm pretty sure you guys have heard of recruitment before, right? So what does this actually mean in regards to the muscles? So as the intensity of nervous stimulation increases, more motor units in a muscle are activated. So what do you mean by that? So if you have a single muscle here, for example, that is going to try to lift a 10-pound weight, right here, 10 pounds weight. So try to lift this, but then it doesn't work. So what is it going to do? It's going to recruit more muscle, more muscle, more muscle, more muscle, until all of them right here is now going to work together to now able to lift this this weight right over here. So maximum contraction of muscle requires that all motor units be in tetanus. Okay, rarely happens because they would all fatigue at the same time. We don't want that to happen, right? Instead, some motor units contract maximally while others are resting. So that is our recruitment. So think of recruitment also as like, let's say you are trying to push a car by yourself, right? And the car is not moving. So what are you going to do? You're going to recruit some of your friends to help you, or recruit somebody to help you push the car. So now that the car is going to actually move. So that is your recruitment. The other one over here is known as your muscle tone. So what is a muscle tone? This is, in other words, this is muscle firmness. So what is muscle firmness? Amount is dependent on muscle contraction. Some motor units are always contracted, but not enough to cause movement. So your muscle, when you're when you think that you are relaxing, okay, not all the muscles are relaxed, but rather some are contracted. Okay, but again, they are contracted, but not enough to cause any kind of movement. So that is your recruitment, and that is your muscle tone. Next slide here. So where is the muscle going to get its energy from? So sources of energy for muscle contraction. So I mentioned already, muscles will need some kind of food, right, in order for it to contract. And this is where they are going to be coming from. Energy for muscle contraction. They have 4 different sources of energy. So when the muscle is going to contract, they are going to take it from 4 different sources of energy. 2 of them are stored in the muscle itself. This is your glycogen. Do you still remember your glycogen? Right, storage form of glucose, right here. And you also have what is known as your triglycerides. Okay, so the other 2 here, acquired from the blood. This is glucose and also your fatty acids. So that's where the 4 sources of energy is gonna come from. And look at this figure over here. Now we could see it right here. So the blue one, muscle triglyceride, right over here. Okay, the green one, muscle glycogen, right? And this is from the blood itself. You have the fatty acids and you have the blood glucose right here. So these are used depends on exercise intensity and duration. So depending on how intense you are going to be exercising or the duration, whether you are just going to run a mile or you're going to run a marathon, right? So as time of exercise increases, use of muscle energy stores decreases and use of energy sources from blood is now going to increase. So what does that actually mean? So if we look at our table here, our graph, I should say, so this is the percentage of energy expenditure. So your first hour right here, right? The first hour of your exercise, where is the energy going to come from primarily? Here, your muscle glycogen. That's the highest right over here. So percentage of energy expenditure. So it's a little bit more than 45%, right? That you're using your muscle glycogen. That's the first hour. You're still using the others as well, as you can see it over here, right? So what is the least that you're going to be using? Your blood glucose right over here. So this is the least. So the most would be the stored glucose, which is in the form of glycogen in your muscle, first hour, okay? So you can see it over here. And you can see the plasma fatty acids and muscle triglycerides, they're about equal right over here. So this is the least. So as you move into your second hour of your exercise, now you can see that the blood glucose utilization is now increasing, as well as the plasma fatty acid. So this is in your blood right over here. These 2 are both in your blood. What's decreased? The muscle glycogen and also the muscle triglyceride. Why are they decreasing? Because you are exhausting them. Okay, so they are now running low. Basically, now you go to your third hour of your exercise, right? So the third hour right here, now you could see that your triglyceride in your muscle keeps on decreasing. So as the glycogen in the muscle. What's increased now is more we are tapping on our blood right there, which is now your plasma fatty acids. Glucose as well, we are tapping. So as you can see it here on the 4th and the 5th hour of your exercise, right over here, now you can see that the glycogen in your muscle has now been depleted. So it's not there anymore. So we're not using it anymore. So what are we now going to be using? We are now primarily going to be using what is in our blood. And that is the plasma fatty acids and your plasma glucose. So here is your example. So analogy here. If you are a marathon runner, right? So the first half mile, okay? The first half marathon right here. So which is about 13.1, right? Miles. So this is the first one, and then this is the second half marathon right over here. So 13.1, and then another 13.1 miles right over here. So this first one over here, what you are utilizing, think of it in this perspective, you are going to be utilizing the one that is found in your muscle, which is the glycogen and your triglycerides. Some's going to be in your bloodstream as well that you're going to be using. But on your second one, if you've ever run a marathon before, now you can see that a lot of people are actually giving out fruits, right, for you to eat. Some form of glucose, those power bars. Now they're being given over here in the second half. So this is the first half right here, and then this is the second half right over here. Why is that so? Because this part over here, your first half of your marathon, you have now depleted your muscle stored glycogen and muscle stored triglyceride. So now you are tapping primarily what's in your bloodstream. And if you keep on running and not consuming anything, guess what? This is gonna get depleted as well, and now you won't be able to finish the race, right? So that is our sources right there. Continue on to the next slide over here. This is now how do we generate the ATP? So where is the source of ATP for the muscle? Okay, we already know that we need glucose, right? We need some kind of sugar in order to form ATP. So now specifically, where are the sources of ATP for the muscle to contract is going to be coming from? So muscle cells store limited amounts of ATP. So we do have ATP stored in our muscle cells, but they are limited. Once it is used up, meaning it's all gone, they have 3 ways to produce more ATP. So what are these 3 ways to produce ATP? This is the first way over here, creatine phosphate. Second one over here, fermentation. Third one over here, cellular respiration. So this first 2 right here, this is anaerobic. What does anaerobic mean? It means without oxygen. So that would be no oxygen right there. So the 3 pathways. So the creatine phosphate pathway right here, which is basically what is this about here? We are going to produce ATP. So creatine phosphate, we split it into creatine and ATP. Right? So creatine phosphate, which is what we have right here, we're going to break it apart into creatine and your ATP. And then there goes your ATP right there. So 1 creatine phosphate, 1 ATP, basically. So that's what's happening there. So if we have a lot of ATP and we want to store it, then you can have you can add the ATP into the creatine, making your creatine phosphate. So this would be this way, right there. This would be this way, right here, to create ATP. Okay. The next one over here is to create ATP utilizing what is known as your fermentation. So glycogen, once again, right over here, okay, can be broken down into lactate and your ATP. So that is your glycogen right there. So this is going to happen without oxygen, okay? And the byproduct, unfortunately, is your lactate or your lactic acid, right? So this lactate here could now actually be accumulating in the muscle, and that's the one that creates the pain that we feel in our muscles when we're working out. So that's the lactic acid, accumulation of lactic acid in the muscles that will now lead to pain in your muscles. So that's your glycogen, breaking it down into lactate, forming ATP, right? If we have the other one over here, known as fermentation, this is what we do when we are going to be storing the glucose into glycogen. Finally, the last one over here is aerobic, meaning it contains oxygen. So in the presence of oxygen, what's going to happen is this: glycogen or fatty acids, okay, is now going to be broken down into carbon dioxide, water, as well as ATP. This cellular respiration right here will create the most ATP out of the 3 right over here. So cellular respiration here, mitochondria uses oxygen, so is aerobic. Neither the creatine phosphate pathway nor fermentation requires oxygen. So this is known as your anaerobic. So that is our sources of muscles in our sources of ATP for the muscles in order for the muscle to contract. All right, next slide over here shows us fast twitch versus a slow twitch muscle fibers, and I will continue this in our next series of our lecture.